I knew something was wrong before I even reached my own driveway. There were cars parked on both sides of my street. Cars I didn't recognize, bumper to bumper like it was a wedding or funeral. My garage door was wide open, my front door was unlocked, and as I sat there in my car, engine still running, staring at my own house like it belonged to someone else, I had no idea that in about 90 seconds, I was going to learn exactly how little my husband thought my life belonged to me. Welcome back to the Family Revenge Tales. My name is Megan Parker. I'm 44 years old. I work as a regional operations manager. The kind of job where people call you at all hours because you're the one who fixes things. I live outside Raleigh, North Carolina, in a house I bought with my own money when I was 30 years old, 5 years before I ever met my husband, Ethan. I tell you that detail first because it matters. It matters more than you know. I turned off the engine, but didn't get out right away. I sat there a moment, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. A minivan I didn't recognize was parked crooked across half my lawn. Someone had left a stack of folding chairs leaning against my mailbox like they'd run out of room to carry them inside. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and I remember thinking, this isn't right, before I even knew what this was. I walked up my own driveway like a stranger casing a house. Sleeping bags lined the hallway. Suitcases were stacked 3 and 4 high against the wall. A little boy I had never seen before ran past me, clutching a toy truck, nearly knocking me sideways. Grocery boxes covered my kitchen counters. And there, standing in the middle of it all like she'd lived there for years, was my sister-in-law, Brooke. "Megan's home," she said, not even glancing up from the counter where she was sorting paper plates. "Good. She can finally tell us where everyone's sleeping." I just stood in my own doorway, frozen. Sleeping? Brooke, what is going on? She looked at me the way you'd look at someone who'd forgotten their own name. "The reunion. Didn't Ethan tell you? Everyone's here for 9 days." 9 days. 22 people in my house, and I was finding out for the first time from my sister-in-law standing in my kitchen, stepping over strangers' luggage like I was the visitor. I want you to understand something about me before I go any further, because it explains everything that happened next. I have always been the one who holds things together. I host every holiday. I remember who's allergic to shellfish and who can't have gluten, and whose kids need the crusts cut off their sandwiches. I keep extra bedding folded in the hall closet for whenever someone shows up unannounced. For years, whenever anything in this family went sideways, I was the one people called because I always answered and I always fixed it. I used to think that was simply what family meant. You show up for each other. You don't keep score. But standing in my kitchen that afternoon, watching a woman I hadn't invited assign bedrooms in a house she didn't own, something in me went very quiet. Not angry yet, just still, the way the air gets right before a storm actually breaks. It was the kind of quiet that comes when you finally see something you've spent years refusing to look directly at. I found Ethan out back on the patio, laughing with his brother over a beer, like this was any ordinary Tuesday evening. "Ethan," I said, "can I talk to you? Now." Something in my voice must have reached him, because he set the bottle down without a word and followed me inside, past the boxes, past the sleeping bags, into the one room in the house that hadn't yet been claimed, our bedroom. I closed the door. "You knew about this." It wasn't a question, and he didn't try to make it one. He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit he's had since the day I met him, the one that means he already knows he's wrong before he opens his mouth. Brooke wanted to rent a place for the reunion, some vacation house down near the coast. It was expensive, Megan. I told her, why spend the money? We've got plenty of room here. You told her that, without asking me. "I figured you'd come around," he said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "You always do." I want you to sit with that sentence with me for a second, because it's the sentence that cracked something open in my chest that I didn't know was still sealed shut. You always do. Not, I hoped you'd be okay with it, not, let's talk about it together first. He had made a decision about my home, my time, my labor for the next 9 days. And he had done it with the calm, easy confidence of a man who had never once had to ask permission to spend my generosity because I had never made him ask before. 20 years of always saying yes had taught him that yes was simply what I did. Ethan, I said, my voice quieter now, I leave for Savannah in 2 days. You know that. He did know. He knew my younger sister Rachel had just finished 6 brutal months of chemotherapy. He knew I had promised her 1 week that had nothing to do with hospitals or infusion chairs or people constantly asking how she was feeling. No cooking for a crowd, no emergencies. Just 2 sisters and the ocean air, a promise I had made to her back when she was too sick to even leave her bed. I figured, he said slowly, not quite meeting my eyes, that you'd push it back. Just this once. Just this once. As if I hadn't heard that exact phrase 100 times before, attached to 100 different favors, 100 different holidays, 100 different moments where my own plans quietly became optional the second someone else needed something from me. I didn't yell at him. I know some of you watching are hoping I threw something across the room, that I screamed until the walls shook. I didn't. I just looked at him, steady and calm, and said, "You invited them. You figure out where they sleep." Then I walked out of that bedroom and left him standing there alone with what he'd done. Over the next day, more pieces came together, and each one was worse than the last. I opened my garage and found boxes stacked along the back wall, labeled in Brooke's handwriting. Parker Family Reunion Permanent Storage. Folding tables, holiday decorations, camping gear, extra dishware. As if my garage had quietly become the family storage facility without anyone ever thinking to ask if that was all right with me. Then I noticed something stranger. Relatives were coming and going through my back door without knocking, without ringing the bell, like they had their own way in. I pulled up the history on my smart lock, scrolling back through months of entries under a guest code I had never created. When I confronted Ethan, he admitted, almost sheepishly, that he'd given Brooke that code years ago for emergencies, he said. Except the log told a different story. Brooke had used that code more than a dozen times, including on 2 separate trips when I was away for work, alone in a house that wasn't supposed to belong to anyone but me and my husband. That night, I sat in my car in the driveway, just to have 5 minutes of quiet, and I called a woman named Karen Mitchell, a real estate attorney I'd consulted with once, years earlier. I didn't want a lawsuit. I didn't want a war with my husband's family splashed across every group chat. I just needed to hear out loud from someone who wasn't emotionally tangled up in any of it that I wasn't losing my mind. Karen confirmed what I already knew in my bones. The house had been mine long before Ethan and I ever married, and nothing about a family reunion changed that. "You're allowed to set terms in your own home," she told me. "That's not cruelty. That's ownership." I sat there in the dark a long time after we hung up, just breathing. The next evening, I asked the adults gathered in my living room to sit down with me. I didn't wave any paperwork around like a weapon. I simply set a copy of the county property record on the coffee table next to a short list of house rules I'd written out by hand. And I said, as calmly as I could manage, "This isn't about whether you're family. It's about whether anyone actually asked." Brooke crossed her arms over her chest. "So now you're going to be controlling in your own house with your own family?" I said, holding her eyes, "You didn't ask me because you assumed my answer didn't matter." Nobody spoke after that. Sometimes silence tells you everything you need to know about how people have really been thinking of you all along. 2 days later, exactly as planned, I boarded a plane to Savannah with my sister. Ethan didn't ask me to cancel. I think, somewhere underneath all his excuses, he finally understood that I wasn't going to. Savannah did something to me I hadn't expected. Rachel and I walked for hours under those old oak trees dripping with silver moss, ate shrimp and grits at a tiny place near the river, sat together on a bench and watched the water for so long we lost track of time. For the first time in months, neither of us had anywhere else we needed to be. One evening, as the sky turned that deep orange color over the water, Rachel turned to me and said something I've thought about nearly every day since. "You keep calling it being needed," she said gently, "but maybe you're just afraid they'll stop loving you if you ever stop doing everything for them." I didn't have an answer for her right away. I just watched the water and let her words settle into my chest, because some part of me had known that truth for years and had never once let myself say it out loud, not even to myself. While I was gone, Brooke posted something to the family group page claiming I had thrown everyone out onto the street and refused to help Ethan's elderly grandmother. It stung, I won't pretend otherwise. Part of me wanted to respond immediately with photographs of the boxes, screenshots of the lock history, receipts for every dollar I'd ever spent hosting this family. But I made a decision, sitting on that riverfront bench in Savannah, that I wasn't going to turn my own life into a public argument. I let the truth exist quietly, and I trusted that eventually it would find its own way out into the light. It did. Ethan's Uncle Calvin, who had been sitting right there the day the whole reunion was first discussed, wrote back to the family thread, plain and simple, "That isn't what happened. Ethan invited everyone without ever asking Megan. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be." Once one person said it plainly, other relatives started asking their own questions, and Brooke's version of events began quietly falling apart under the weight of its own inconsistencies. When Ethan finally called me in Savannah, I braced myself, certain he was going to ask me to come home and clean up the mess. He didn't. "I handled it," he said. His voice sounded different than I'd ever heard it, tired in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. "Everyone's checked into a hotel downtown. I covered the cost. The house is clean. I talked to Brooke myself, and I told her the truth." For the first time in longer than I could remember, my husband had faced a problem he created and solved it without once expecting me to be the one who fixed it for him. When I came home from Savannah, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months. The luggage was gone, the garage was cleared out, the guest code on the smart lock had been deleted entirely. I stood in my own kitchen and felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was peace. But underneath it, caution, too. I looked at Ethan and told him honestly, "I'm not deciding what happens to us just because you cleaned up one mess. I'm going to watch what you do next." And he did change, though. Not all at once, not with some grand speech meant to win me back in a single night. It happened slowly, in small, consistent choices that actually meant something. He started coming with me to counseling. He stopped fielding questions from his family on my behalf and let them call him directly instead. He began asking me before making any plans that involved our home, even small ones. When his mother called with a complaint about something trivial, he handled it himself instead of quietly expecting me to smooth it over the way I always had. He stopped calling himself the family peacekeeper because he'd finally understood that keeping the peace by spending my time and my patience without asking was never peace at all. It was just moving the cost of his comfort onto me. The real test came at Christmas. His mother called and asked whether the family could gather at our house for Christmas Eve. The old Ethan would have said yes before I'd even finished hearing the question. This time, he looked at me first and said, "I need to ask Megan." And then he actually waited for my answer. I said yes, with conditions. Everyone brings a dish, no one stays overnight, no one gets into that house without being personally let in. Ethan handled every bit of the planning and the cleanup himself, without me having to ask him twice. On Christmas Eve, the doorbell rang. I opened the front door, and there stood Brooke, empty-handed of any key, standing on the porch she used to walk through like she owned it. "Is it okay if we come in?" she asked. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled and said, "Yes." It was such a small thing, a doorbell, 4 simple words, but it told me, more clearly than any apology ever could, that something had actually truly changed. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house had gone still, Ethan stood in front of his family before they left and said something I don't think I'll ever forget. Megan's kindness was never permission, he told them. He admitted in front of everyone that he had let his family use my generosity for years because it was easier than ever disappointing them, and that he had failed me as a husband by letting me quietly carry the weight of decisions he made alone. When the house was finally empty again, no strangers, no suitcases, no children running through the halls, Ethan reached for my hand across the couch. He didn't grab it, he simply held his hand open, palm up, and waited to see if I wanted to take it. I did, not because everything was suddenly magically fixed, but because for the first time in a long time, he had shown me that love isn't just about staying together, it's about respecting the person you're staying with. If this story moved you tonight, if you've ever been the one everyone counts on but nobody actually asks, I hope you'll subscribe to the Family Revenge Tales. We tell these stories because so many of you are living some quiet version of them, carrying more than anyone around you even realizes. And if there's one thing I hope you carry with you after hearing Megan's story, it's this. Your peace is not selfish, your boundaries are not cruelty, and the people who truly love you will never need you to disappear in order to feel comfortable. What makes the story meaningful isn't the conflict itself, but what it teaches about the quiet, often invisible difference between generosity and obligation. So many people, especially those raised to be the caretakers of their families, learn to measure their own worth by how much they give, until giving stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a debt they never actually agreed to owe. This story shows that setting a boundary isn't an act of anger, it's an act of self-respect, and that real love, real family, doesn't punish you for having limits, it learns instead to ask for permission rather than assuming it was already granted. It also shows that genuine change is proven through consistent action over time rather than a single emotional apology, the way Ethan didn't just say sorry once, but showed up differently, day after day, until trust had an honest reason to return. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds every viewer watching that you can protect your peace, hold your ground firmly, and still leave room for the people you love to grow and earn their way back into your life without ever losing yourself in the process.